If you want to see something nice or something nasty, come and sit by me. You can eat ice cream if you like, as long as you don't drop it when we get to the bit with the stabbing. Or the bit where the chorus girl catches fire. Or the lubricious scene on the casting couch. Just be nice and quiet and enjoy the dark. And if you feel a hand on your knee, don't worry, it's only me. Keep your eyes on the screen. Shh, it's starting. The 1930s, the most breathless, chaotic and scandalous decade in the history of the British film business.
No!
A decade in which studios rose and fell.
Take two.
In which the talkies murdered the silent picture. Producers lit cigars when they were in the money and killed themselves when they went bust. Gossip columns flourished.
Film star working as domestic servant.
Amazing allegations by film extra girls.
Scandal sheets devoured stories of drunkenness and adultery amongst the movie-making classes. And our greatest director worked with his fly buttons undone. Hush my mouth, I love this stuff. Roll 'em. Shepperton, Babylon. Let's start with something good and bloody, eh, Toots?
If I had a talking picture of you.
It's 1933 and we're in Cleveland Gardens, a brand new drag of semis on a North London estate, and as dreary and silent as the suburbs can be.
And applaud each time you whispered, I love you, love you.
The people who live here are stolid middle-class types. Insurance clerks, GPO engineers, typists.
I would give 10 shows a day and a midnight matinee if I had a talk.
Except the lady at number 45. She's rather different, or she used to be. At the end of the 1920s, Lillian Hall Davis was one of the most famous women in Britain. Now, when she buys her groceries in Golders Green, she's rarely recognized. The public is fickle that way. Poor Lillian Hall Davis. Beauty queen, film star, Hitchcock heroine, a London cabbie's daughter made good. She loved fast cars. She loved the English countryside. She loved her teenage son. On the afternoon of the 25th of October 1933, Lillian Hall Davis played her final scene. The papers provided the title.
Tragic twilight of screen beauty.
Lillian Hall Davis tragedy.
Film stars end.
Tragic discovery by son.
She went upstairs and took her brother's razor from the bathroom cabinet. She walked down to the kitchen and locked the door behind her. She turned on the gas taps. She drew the razor across her throat. The blood pooled on the liner. The gas hissed all afternoon. It was just like something from the movies. Mr. Hitchcock would have been proud. Don't drop that ice cream now. In 1927, Lillian Hall Davis was one of the biggest draws at the British box office. Fan magazines printed cute copy about her likes and dislikes. Producers all over Europe were eager to hire her. Well, wouldn't you? 6 years later, however, movie hacks no longer sought her opinions. Work was harder to come by, and her domestic life wasn't exactly peachy. She was living apart from her husband, and she was sliding into deep depression. Lillian Hall Davis's generation of stars had been recruited for their looks, for their ability to communicate emotion through facial expression and gesture. Nobody considered whether their voices were as seductive as their faces. Until Jolson sang.
I'd walk 1,000,000 miles for one of your smiles, but my me.
But for stars whose voices matched their faces, the talkies were an unlosable game.
I have known a time when a whole town belonged to me.
There was money everywhere.
I'm rich. I'm rich. I'm rich.
Everyone wanted a piece of the action. Spivs, conmen,
Who cares anyway?
industrialists, rich widows.
I love it.
They wanted a movie to sink their cash into. Every chorus boy and showgirl and debutante ached to be smiling under the punching lights of Elstree or Shepperton.
Well, don't sit down, don't sit down. I can't spend a minute with you. The Lyceum. Righto, pass it on, please, will you? Let me see, we saw you this morning, didn't we?
Yes.
Yes, right, right. I said blonde. Are you a blonde? Oh, I'm sorry.
For anyone who could hold a camera straight, the 1930s were a boom time in Britain. More feature films were being made than ever before. Spanking new studio complexes were springing up around London. Welwyn Garden City, Elstree, Twickenham, Ealing, Shepperton. Ah, Shepperton. Sound City, they called it. It's so romantic it makes me want to weep. And in these places, the scenery boys rebuilt the world in balsa and plaster of Paris. Squadron of biplanes, Roger Wilco. The Colosseum, Ave Caesar. London street scene, cobbles or tarmac. The cameras rolled all night. Film stars toiled like mill girls. Studio staff banged away around the clock. The night crew came in at 10. The day crew came back in at 8 the next morning. The smell of sweat, orange peel and stale farts was sometimes more than a star could bear.
So miserable.
You're miserable? You're crying too? That's right. It's good to cry. You should cry more.
Oh, you've got no feelings at all. You don't seem to care what happens.
As long as people do what they want to do and what they're meant to do.
All this success, all this excess, had been brought into being by a rather unexciting piece of paper. The Cinematographic Films Act, 1927. The Act forced cinema chains to show British film. For every Hollywood flick they screened, a rising quota of British pictures had to be shown. And new technology meant that sound and pictures could now be synchronized. The British were coming, and they talked.
Oi!
And they made more sense than this boot-polish smeared mummy's boy. Many British film producers hadn't been enthusiastic about the arrival of sound. And looking at Al here, you can understand why. Sound in the movie is a gimmick like 3D or smell-o-vision. Just when you're getting used to the idea of synchronized sound, Jolson loses his voice. It's as if the picture had suddenly been dunked underwater. But it took scads of cash at the US box office, and nobody could argue with that. Not for long, anyway.
The Al Jolson film created a furore overnight. Everybody rushed madly to elocution lessons.
The whole world of film was topsy-turvy, and nobody quite knew what was going to happen, as the change had been so sudden.
So the British movie business did what Lillian Hall Davis couldn't do. It forced itself to love the talkies. But the silence didn't go down without a fight. This film is a hybrid of the talkie and the silent. Its only sound section is a satire on the shortcomings of the new technology. The scene takes place in a cinema. The audience is watching a silent slapstick comedy, and what larks they're having. Now the orchestra is down tools, and the audience is treated to an all-new talking picture. Hardly a ringing endorsement, is it? The first British director to embrace sound wholeheartedly was one you've all heard of, Alfred Hitchcock. Son of a Leytonstone greengrocer, liked his food, liked being mean to actresses. But he wasn't so much of a sadist as he pretended to be. Not quite, anyway.
Oh, he's gone to London already, has he? If you could manage it, I'd like that whiskey hot.
Here's a sweet little insight into his true nature. In the close-up here, Madeleine Carroll isn't staring in horror at the two heavies at the desk. She's goggling at something her director had just whopped out of his pants. But I'm wandering from the point. Slap hands. In 1929, Hitch made Britain's first all-talking, full-length feature film. Blackmail is classic Hitchcock. A girl, two lovers, an assault. And a murder committed in self-defense. Where the jazz singer struggled to make sound seem anything more than a gimmick, Hitchcock made it function as a way of communicating character.
Breakfast? I couldn't have backed in the face after what happened last night. And under our very noses.
This doe-eyed girl has just sunk a carving knife into the man who tried to rape her.
I must say that's what
Now she's full of guilt, and there's only one word she can hear.
Never use a knife. Now, mind you, a knife is a difficult thing to handle. I mean, any knife. I mean, if you use a knife, or a knife, where wouldn't belong in a butcher's knife.
Some of Hitch's critics thought this a bit too clever, a bit too literary. And indeed, he'd borrowed, all right then, stolen the device from Chapter 11 of Joseph Conrad's Secret Agent. But that's what made him a genius, and his critics just critics.
Knife!
Hitch liked to tell a story about blackmail. That he'd been asked to make only the last 2 reels with synchronized sound, but had secretly shot the whole picture that way, turning off the lights in the studio whenever his paymasters from British International Pictures came snooping around the set. It's a darling story, and quite untrue. Here's something strange that we know actually happened. The heroine of the picture was a newsagent's daughter from East London. The actress playing her, Annie Ondra, had been born in Middle Europe, and her vowels were as Austro-Hungarian as the Archduke Franz Ferdinand's epaulettes. Not a problem for a silent picture, but a nightmare in a film shot with sound.
You asked me to let you hear your voice on the talking picture.
But Hitch, you mustn't do that.
Why not?
Well, because I can speak well.
Do you realize the squad band will be here any moment?
No, really. Oh, my God, I'm terribly frightened.
Why? Have you been a bad woman or something?
Well, not just that, but...
But you slept with men.
Oh, no!
You have not. Come here. Stand in your place. Otherwise, it will not come out right, as the girl said to the soldier. That's enough.
Here's how Mr. Hitchcock obliterated her ghastly foreignness. Andra mouthed her lines on camera, while just out of shot, a nice young county gal named Joan Barry spoke the words.
Oh, I can't tell you. It's too terrible. I was defending myself. I didn't know what I was doing. And then...
Blackmail was the last film that Annie Andra made in English. But don't feel sorry for her. She moved back to Germany, got in with a less respectable crowd. Dr. Goebbels once sent her a bouquet. Other actresses didn't even get flowers. This is Leah Deputy.
Oh, God!
She suffered for her art. She was given a voice double, too.
I don't know what to say.
Or how to say it. Because no matter how many hours she spent how-now brown cowing with expensive elocution teachers, she couldn't get the Budapest out of her voice. Mind you, the character was supposed to be from Dublin.
He's to be brought here alive, is he? Why alive? Are you afraid to plug him like the dirty rat he is? Call yourselves men. And you treat an informer like a bad boy at a Sunday school. He was my lover. My lover, I say, and I don't care who knows it.
But forget them. This is the girl who really deserves your sympathy. Little Mabel Polton, star of The Constant Nymph. A British hit about a passionate entanglement between a composer and a 14-year-old schoolgirl. Mabel was the perfect silent screen waif, loved by audiences in Paris and London. But the talkies revealed that she had the voice of an East End barrow girl, which is exactly the line her old ma was in.
I'll catch you in a minute.
It's Providence, that's what it is. But I always think what is to be will be, don't you? Because if Mr. Hyman hadn't changed that scene, what was to be would have been different, wouldn't it?
Poppy, you talk all the time, but you don't say nothing.
And why should we feel sorry for her? Well, it's rather hard not to, once you read a strange, semi-literate typescript that she spent her last years writing and rewriting.
He laughed, and taking her in his arms, forced a very unpleasant kiss on her. Jenny, disgusted, pulled away from him, and inflamed more by her resistance, he threw her on the bed.
You little bitch!
He said.
I'll see you get no more opportunities in this film.
Mabel's story is a romanacliffe about a young British starlet who is raped by a film director and slides into alcoholism. Then, at some later point, she has taken a biro and written in all the real names upon which these figures were based. Thomas Bentley is the film director she accuses. In Polton's account, he asks her to hitch up her skirts in order to secure a part. The part was Little Nell. Do you recall a striptease scene in the old curiosity shop? Nor I. Directors demanding sex in return for work were nothing new, but the upheavals in the British film business in the last years of the 20s and the early 30s, the boom in production, the switch over to sound, made the casting couch more important than ever.
I'm young and healthy, and you've got charm. It would really be a sin not to have you in my arms. I'm young and healthy, and so are you. When the moon is in the sky, tell me what am I to do?
This is Walter Summers, or the Mad Captain, as he was known unaffectionately on set. A dedicated director. While making a film about the First World War, the special effects killed 2 extras and robbed 3 more of an assortment of limbs and eyes. Summers had a penchant for making unconventional test reels of unfinger-marked young actresses. This isn't his work, but it's just the kind of thing he might have sold you under a plain brown wrapper. Until, that is, one of his victims questioned why she was being asked to leap out of her camisole for a spot of nudie dancing.
Nude dance test in film studio.
He told her that she had to act the part of a sort of vamp, stand before the camera, start taking off her clothing, act as a vamp all the time, and continue taking off her clothing until she was completely naked. He added that it was quite an ordinary sort of thing, and that it was only to be shown privately. She then said,
All right.
But her mother was having none of it. She took Summers to court. The judge ordered him to pay £500 in damages. Looking at that made me feel dirty. Did it have the same effect on you? I think it's time we watched something more wholesome. How about a fat man with a xylophone?
British films holding their own.
More British pictures wanted.
Brilliant pictures from British studios.
The rebirth of British pictures went arm in arm with the rebirth of the British Picture Palace. In the old days, usherettes went down the aisles defumigating the patrons. Now, cinemas had carpets, unlike the homes of the people in the cheap seats. The 1930s was the age of the super cinema. Every town had huge neoclassical or Art Deco movie theatres that could seat up to 3,000 people. It was the age of the Odeon. The name sounded impressively Greek, but it was actually an acronym of the owner's mission statement. Oscar Deutsch entertains our nation. One nation, but two audiences. People like you and me, and the sort of people who kept their coal in the bath.
I don't mind that, I don't mind that, and I don't mind that, but don't do that. I won't have it. I understand that.
Stage comedians and melodramatists were booked by film producers eager to exploit the huge market of working-class filmgoers. That's where the money was. This is Ernie Lottinger. Nice people affected not to like him.
You insolent dog.
Go on, you saucy puppy.
How dare you call me a puppy?
How dare I call you a
How
puppy?
dare you?
You want to know what he said about you?
Oh, indeed. And what did he say about me?
He said you weren't fit to marry a pig.
Is that so?
Yes.
And what did you say to that?
I said you were.
This is Todd Slaughter, who toured neo-Victorian barnstormers around spit and sawdust theatres. Aware of how Slaughter's public loved to boo and hiss the villain, directors left gaps on the soundtrack for the cinema audiences to do the same.
What are you doing here? Why is your shop closed?
I thought you had a customer.
Have you seen him?
No?
Swear that.
Of course I swear.
Strange.
And for the delectation of the cocktail-bibbing classes, West End stars trolled off stage, then worked through the night on the floors of Twickenham or Shepperton. Suburban housewives went silly over slightly louche figures who knew how to hold a cigarette properly.
I'm going to Rome.
Yes, it is the Rome Express, isn't it?
This is Hugh Williams, all brilliantine and 1930s sex.
Why don't you get out of it?
Too deep in.
You're losing your grip, Tony. Why don't you pull yourself out while there's still time?
Oh, hell, what's the use? Who cares, anyway?
Someone or other. Maybe.
I could eat you, Marlowe. Well, try it. Right!
And this is Henry Kendall.
Sorry, my mistake.
Queer as a coot, but popular with the ladies of the period.
One of those for me?
Why, certainly.
Thanks. The toast is Marlowe, coupled with the name of Pentonville. You've drugged it, you swine.
The talkies failed to slaughter all the silent idols. Some of them survived into the sound period. This is Ivor Novello, the Valentino of British cinema. Isn't he just... couldn't you just... Directors struggled to find actresses who could stand next to him without looking plain and goofy.
I have known nights when the entire Imperial Ballet danced for an audience of one. Me.
Ivor Novello's feminized form of glamour had turned 1920s audiences to jelly. His heroes were always beautiful victims, kissable underworld kingpins robbed of their power. Schoolboys who turned to prostitution. In Novello's films, the star's body was always the object of erotic interest. Audiences gasped audibly at the locker room scenes in Hitchcock's Downhill. Novello signed a studio contract that obliged him to comport himself with dignity and decency in private and professional life. But his audiences were always willing to think the worst of him. That was why they loved him. Oddly, they never objected to the Welsh-flavoured Ruritanian accent.
Ah, but then, you know, women age so much quicker than men. When the man is in his prime, the woman is finished. It's a pity, but she's finished. You might just as well throw her away now.
All I do is dream of you the whole night through.
On screen, his sexuality appealed to male and female viewers alike. Off-screen, Novello preferred the adoration of young men. His co-stars, his co-writers, his chauffeurs, his secretaries, if they had imperfections, he sent them off to the plastic surgeon. One of his secretaries was made a gift of a beautifully perky little nose. And if they bored him, he gave them the elbow. He broke hearts, he broke up marriages, he kept smiling.
Felix, delightful.
Gossip columns made jokes about the Nancy Boy intensity of his relationship with his mother, Madame Clara Novello, a crepe-wrapped matron who shared a flat in the West End with her son and his boyfriends.
Darling, I have made you unhappy.
He confessed himself particularly fond of pictures of mother love. No man came between Ivor and his mam. He addressed her as Beauty Popsy Darling and told interviewers that she was the most wonderful woman in the world.
In the meantime, it's our little secret.
Some people, I'm sorry to say, made unfriendly remarks about it in public. Novello was a survivor of the old order. but he kept the new generation of theatre and film stars entertained at his nightclub in the West End.
That's the end of the party, the end of the party. Have another, that's just another, that's two.
The 50-50 was a well-appointed martini trough in a former Soho billiard hall. The walls were adorned with portraits of the stars. The idea was to persuade life to imitate art. Novello owned the lease jointly with Henry Kendall. We saw him a moment ago. The musical gentleman.
You drugged it, you swine.
The Novello-Kendall partnership was the official explanation for the name. Most took it as a reference to its atmosphere of bisexuality.
What's all? Oh, anything. 2 half and half. Yes. Half and half what? Oh, just a half and half. It's their speciality. The half and half club has got its half and half cocktail, of course. How frightfully original. Hello, darling. Hello. The people also look half and half at me. What do you mean? Well, the women look half men, and the men look half nothing.
Maybe good night. Oh, that's the end of the party, the end of the party.
Not all of these new stars who invaded from the theatre were as adorable as Novello. Some of them couldn't have been beautified by all the hired razors of Harley Street. Charles Lawton was ugly. Henry Fonda once told him so, adding that he was also fat and a faggot. Lawton tried not to care. The talkies had made him rich.
So I am, I'm glad of it.
The private life of Henry VIII was smutty and irreverent.
What do you think, sir?
Oh, charming, Your Grace.
It was British history as sex comedy.
Blushing? She must be new to the court. What's your name, wench?
Catherine Howard, if it please Your Majesty.
It does, Catherine. It does.
Now, private life. You know what it means, don't you? Everyone in this cinema knows that it means sex life. Except him, perhaps.
Are you going to sing for me again?
Any time Your Majesty orders me.
Tonight in my rooms.
Hardly the right place for singing, Your Majesty.
Your rooms, then. 11 o'clock. On a Soul scene. Refinement's a thing of the past.
For Lawton's work on the film, an Oscar was pressed into his sweaty palms. No Briton had won the award before.
A film of British triumph.
Henry VIII acclaimed as Britain's best film.
New standard of excellence for British films.
And here's the man who can take the credit. Alexander Korda. Fanfare, please, boys. Charismatic. Hungarian. Excitingly dishonest. He smoked big cigars. He said,
"Come see me Thursday and we'll talk about it."
And didn't turn up. He rented a suite at Claridge's, filled it with Picassos, and invited the suckers in.
Alexander, we'd like to know something about your impressions of Hollywood.
Well, Hollywood is a great world. It's a wonderful fairyland. And they are making some very good films. But we hope they make them as well, or much better.
Korda traded ruthlessly on The Private Life of Henry VIII. He followed it with The Private Life of Don Juan.
Business. 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 You care only for business.
He even used sex to sell a film about seabirds.
The Private Life of the Gannets.
Korda was the star maker par excellence. He knew how to treat their sort.
Here I am.
he brought Robert Donat and Marlene Dietrich together for Night Without Armor.
Were you thinking that I wouldn't come back to you?
He imported Paul Robeson to Britain for Sanders of the River. He discovered Merle Oberon, the illegitimate daughter of a New Zealand hotelier, and sold her exotic beauty to the world. She was so grateful, she married him.
Lovely little girl. She looked awful by daylight.
Corder had a rival over on Ealing Green, Basil Dean, bloody Basil to his enemies. Only he didn't have Corder's knack for ballyhoo, or the sense to know which of his vainglories would make good box office. He wanted to make literary blockbusters, monster costume dramas for the masses, and he wanted them all to star his wife.
Yeah.
A doll-faced beauty named Victoria Hopper. Dean had big plans for his wife and put her into film after film.
No, you mustn't. For your own sake.
And film after film flopped because, in the words of one contemporary, Hopper couldn't act for toffee.
It's so long ago.
But now I shall come again soon.
No, you mustn't. For your own sake.
Ealing Studios might well have collapsed, had it not been for two stars whose success was a matter of total bafflement to its boss.
I'm rich. I'm rich.
George Formby and Gracie Fields. Our Gracie was born over a chip shop in Rochdale and never let anyone forget it. The public's love for Fields was matched only by its indifference to Hopper. Dean was mystified by her success. Freakish, he called it, but only in a confidential memo. And at least his wife didn't have to shave her top lip before being allowed on camera. Mind your best glassware now.
Sally, Sally, don't ever wander away from the alley and me.
There you are, Mr. Smith. And it's all yours, Charlie.
George Formby was Gracie's only serious competition. He was just as popular and just as odd.
I went into a nightclub where a lady did a dance. She'd nothing on but pigeons and she left the rest to chance. She didn't seem to feel the cold, the birds knew where to stay. I clapped my hands and shouted, but they wouldn't fly away. Oh, I wish he was down on our path.
Dean saw him as a good investment, but that didn't mean he liked him or appreciated his sense of humour, which was mainly dependent upon falling off things and allusions to sex.
When I'm cleaning windows, there's a famous talky queen. She looks a flapper on the screen. She's more like 80 than 18. When I'm cleaning windows, she pulls her hair all down behind, then pulls down her never mind, and after that pulls down the blind. When I'm cleaning windows,
George was kept on a leash by his wife, a paranoid clog dancer named Beryl. She was obsessed with the idea that George's glamorous co-stars would attempt to seduce him. Interesting theory, isn't it?
Splendid. A little rough and ready, but when you've taken my course, you'll sing like an angel.
Smut was a gift to the talkie from the music hall. Sex had been put to comic use in the silence.
I hope Joan won't be long, or we shall be late.
But the talkies allowed British cinema to inherit the music hall's rich tradition of elusive, dirty jokes.
Now then, can I have a look at the ladies' trinkets? Yeah. Oh, well, I don't know about that. You see, I'm only the best man.
No, you don't see what I'm trying to get at.
Oh, yes, I do.
I simply want to peep at her what-nots.
Oh, well, you better show them to him, Ginger. They're outside.
In America, the moral restrictions of the Hays Code made sure that no funny business was visible on screen.
That, I suppose, makes everything quite all right.
Well, this? Well, I like privacy when I retire.
The American censors snipped away at this film, but in Britain, its stars were free to wink and nudge until they were sore.
Get out of those clothes.
I'll have them all off before Your Majesty can turn round.
Yes, but I'm not going to turn round.
You are off duty, Your Majesty.
You can't say things like that.
British talkies were more socially progressive than their Hollywood counterparts.
You know you mean everything to me.
Not everything, John.
No wonder Paul Robeson preferred to work here.
I can't take you to Africa. But if there's anything in this world I can do for you.
There's one thing you can do.
Here's something else that Hollywood would never have countenanced.
Right now.
Now, I'm just popping out for a drink on a stick. You sit tight for a bit. I'll get you some Kia Ora if you promise not to slap it. With the arrival of sound, the people on the screen began to seem more approachable than the stars in the silent era. They talked in their films,
I feel very honoured at being here this evening.
so they had no excuse not to talk to the press.
Well, I can't tell you how delighted I am to be back this evening to see this picture. I think it's the loveliest provincial cinema I've ever seen.
And I hope it's going to bring happiness and pleasure to thousands of people. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't think I can say very much more than Margaret said. That's all the things I wish myself.
There was one star journalist who was more elegantly poisonous than all the rest. Nerina Shute of Film Weekly. She was bisexual and a star maker. And she measured her success by every writ that landed on her editor's desk. Nerina just couldn't help being sarcastic. She just sat at her typewriter, moved her fingers about, and there it was. Marie Ault had a face like an appetizing loaf of bread. Madeleine Carroll was a ruthless Madonna. Nelson Keyes was a baby Austin lady killer. Rebecca West considered Nerina's writing barbarous. Film Weekly considered her the perfect studio gossip columnist, even though she was only 19 years old. They liked Barbarous. Barbarous was good. Barbarous sold. It made actors fear her, and that gave Nerina quite a kick.
Most lovable ass. Elstrie's most annoying man. Most unpopular man in film. Naughtiest film ever made.
Some took her out for cocktails and tried to charm her into being nice. Some had hissy fits. Directors, particularly. Hitchcock couldn't stand Nerina. But then she didn't think much of him either.
His enormous body sprawls back on a folding chair. His enormous brain seems to sprawl as well. He seems half asleep. You would never dream that this is our finest director. Just a very fat man.
Nerina had a habit of quoting the nasty letters her subjects wrote to her to complain about her remarks, which rarely aided their cases. The handsome leading man, Carl Brisson, told Nerina that he disliked her intensely. She quoted his words in her piece. Ouch. So he whisked her off to the Savoy, plied her with cocktails, fed her tidbits of gossip, much the best way of getting her on your side. Nerina's columns didn't just kick actors and directors when they were down. She built them up if she thought they were any good, and the studios listened.
If you're not using the phone, may I? I want to get on to Scotland Yard.
Here's one of her favourites. Donald Calthrop, the villain of Hitchcock's Blackmail. He was already a well-regarded screen actor before the talkies came along. But it was sound that sealed Calthrop's reputation. He was the first actor to master the new medium. Where other actors sounded stilted and unnatural, he spoke effortlessly and musically.
Couldn't we discuss that over breakfast?
The medium was instantly his own.
Before we get to any hanging, I shall have quite a lot to say. And the first thing I shall say is that she was there too.
After the reviews for Blackmail came in, he was the toast of the studios. But fate can be such a rotten cow, can't she? In 1930, Donald Calthrop had the worst night of his life.
The Film Studio Horror.
It's the evening of 31st of March. It's a cold night. That's an important detail. Donald Calthrop is driving from his home on Chandos Street to Twickenham Studios, where he's making a film called Spanish Eyes. Music, dancing, violins, all the rage in 1930. Now keep your A to Z in your handbag. But you're right. This isn't the way to Twickenham. He's going to take a detour first. To the Piccadilly Theatre. Donald Calthrop is here for... well, he told the coroner that he came to the stage door to pick up a dressing gown. But he also drove away from the Piccadilly with something else in his car. This is Anita Faye Tipping. Works under the name of Nita Foy. Lives with relatives in Maida Vale. Wants to be a star. She has about 2 hours to live. When they pull up at the studio, well, shall we stick to Donald's story? He asks her to pop into his dressing room for a quick brandy and soda to perk her up. It's going to be a long night. And there they are in Donald's dressing room. Who knows what they talked about? Did they kiss? Did he tell her about his wife? It would be vulgar to speculate. Anyway, Donald notices that Anita, has some white powder on her eyes, and that will never do. It'll show up on the camera. He has a little pot of mascara she may borrow. He reaches for the soda siphon. She reaches for the makeup. Trouble is, as she reaches over, her crinoline makes contact with the bars of Donald's electric fire. It's a cold night. Told you that was important.
Stage girl burnt to death.
With every shred of clothing burned from her figure and hardly a square inch of her body untouched by the flames, Miss Tipping was taken in an ambulance to hospital, where she lingered for a day, and then succumbed to injuries and shock.
Donald never got over it. Would you? Imagine how he would have felt the next time he put on his mascara. So it was goodbye to his marriage, goodbye to his money, goodbye to his sobriety too, and that meant the odd night in a jail cell. From now on, every time he gets into trouble for being drunk and disorderly or trying to obtain money on false pretenses, there'll be a hack with a spiral pad and a talent for composing humiliating paragraphs in Pitman's shorthand. Donald was unlucky. His spot of bother coincided with a new hunger for press stories about film people. Even extras would do, if the stories involved drugs or contricts or abortions or disinfectant drinking or attacks with dog whips. And stars played the publicity game with the press. Ivor Novello gave interviews in bed to impressionable female hacks, though he made sure to keep his pajamas on.
Oh, yes, Ivor has a touch of the feminine, but that's his charm. He makes no attempt to assume the He-Man attitude.
British film fans became very skilled at reading between the gossip columnists' lines. There was one paper in particular which was always there to laugh at the funeral of a film star's reputation. You might have heard of it. You may even have flicked through someone else's copy on the train. Yes, the News of the World. In the 1930s, the paper woke up to the fact that stories about movie stars were a sure way of increasing sales. It was there, beside the casting couch, scribbling down the details.
Stage girls bluff.
Month in prison after champagne party.
Film actress freed.
Arrested at dinner in stolen fur coat.
Film star working as domestic servant.
Pitiful suicide story of brilliant Annie Arlers.
Champagne, brandy, narcotics and breaking nerves.
Sex and misery, the perfect accompaniments to Sunday morning bacon.
Go to my hand,
And one woman knew how to give the British press exactly what it wanted. Tallulah Bankhead, a politician's daughter from Alabama, a hot American star who loved the charms of little old England, especially its men.
I've tried several varieties of sex. The conventional position makes me claustrophobic, and the others give me either stiff neck or lockjaw.
Bankhead's life in London was one of public affairs. She took up with Hugh Williams and almost killed him with sex. He was forced to move to Australia to escape her influence and save his marriage. She nurtured her reputation as a man-eater.
It doesn't matter what they say, darling, as long as they talk.
She didn't mind the gossip, but sniffy notices were quite another thing. Angry about an unfavourable review in the Daily Express, she marched into the offices of the newspaper and slapped the face of the critic who'd given her a bad notice.
Take that.
Fans cheered her from the pavement outside. According to a government report, she was both a lesbian and immoral with men. It was a one-woman assault on the nation's morals. That's what the spooks at MI5 thought, anyway. Tallulah was a threat to national security, up there with the unions and that dreadful Ramsay MacDonald. Agent FHM was put on her tail. One man stood between Tallulah and the sexual enslavement of British manhood. Our man from MI5 snooped around the Hotel de Paris, the one in Bray. Here, gossip said she'd taken a phalanx of Eton schoolboys to her suite for an initiation they'd never forget. Everyone got detention. Except Tallulah. She got a contract with Paramount and was off on the next boat. She kept up the act until her dying words, which were, more bourbon, more codeine. After that, the party was over. as it was in the country in which she enjoyed her spree. In Britain, there were other things to worry about.
And I sink in my chair, the smoke from my cigarette climbs through the air. The walls of my room fade away in the blue, and I'm deep in a dream of you.
Since 1937, the British film boom had been faltering. Investors who had pitchforked money into the British studio system at the beginning of the boom had begun to wonder where it had all gone. There had been a little blossoming of bankruptcies. Twickenham went under. Teddington pulled down the shutters. Shepperton stood idle. By 1938, Elstree had its own soup kitchen for unemployed movie personnel. Rumours of war didn't help. As the possibility of conflict nudged closer, nervous stars began to consult the timetables for transatlantic liners. Hitchcock developed a sudden yen for Californian orange juice. Gracie Fields packed her bags too. No matter how often she popped back to entertain the troops, the public never forgave her for declining to sing them through the Blitz. At Sound City, there was only silence. British films were doomed. That's how it seemed. Nobody could have known it, but the opposite was true. War would bring about the triumphant rebirth of the British studio system. One by one, the studios reopened. The cameras rolled again with a new urgency. There would be kissing and crying, and chilling emotional pragmatism, and rough 18th century sex.
It'll be a new experience to take you against your will.
Lots of that. And Shepperton Babylon would be remade from its own ruins. I love a happy ending, don't you? Fancy a Craven, eh? They're so good for the throat. Or should I just put on a pair of Regency breeches and slap you senseless? Your choice. Oh, but we have to go now, because I think this is where we came in.
If I had a talking picture of you, I would run it every time I felt blue. I would sit there in the gloom of my lonely little room and applaud each time you whispered, I love you, on the screen the moment you came in view.